Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Mark Steiner. Great to have you all with us. Trump's budget dropped at the doorstep of Congress. It's the largest budget in American history, with increased military budget making for a record-breaking $4.75 trillion. All this built on the backs of working people, families mired in poverty, by hacking away at Medicare, Medicaid, through student loan forgiveness, ending that, work requirements for the poor, slashing important programs and budgets for education and environmental regulation. This is a budget around which Trump will build his presidential campaign. The ball is now in the Democrats' court. Are they up to the challenge, since they're deeply divided on plans like Medicare for All and the Green New Deal? We look at the social and political consequences of this militarized Trump budget with Lindsay Koshgarian, who is Program Director of the National Priorities Project at the Institute for Policy Studies. And Lindsay, welcome back. Good to have you with us again.
Good to be here. Thanks.
So let me begin this. We're going to watch this short clip from the Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget, Russell Vought, V-O-U-G-H-T, I think it's Vought. And what he had to say, Trump has not said anything publicly, but this is his spokesperson from the Department of Budget.
Today, we have released the President's fiscal year 2020 budget. No president has done more in 2 years to strengthen our military, restart our economy, and reform our government than President Trump. The budget requests $750 billion for our national defense. And to be clear, this is not funding for endless wars. This is for research and development and procurement to fund the most awe-inspiring military the world has ever known.
Now let's go back 52 years to a man who was a visionary, had a different view of what budget should be and what our society should be.
A true revolution of values will lay hands on the world order and say of war, this way of settling differences is not just. This business of burning human beings with napalm, of filling our nation's homes and with orphans and widows, of injecting poisonous drugs of hate into the veins of peoples normally humane, of sending men home from dark and bloody battlefields, physically handicapped and psychologically deranged, cannot be reconciled with wisdom, justice, and love. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death.
And of course, that was the Reverend Martin Luther King in the very famous Riverside speech he gave in 1967 when he came out against the war in Vietnam, but began really talking about what the budget should be and how much you spend on the military. So let's just take that as first blush for you, Lindsay, and your analysis of what you saw. This is the largest military budget in American history, slashing all kinds of other things, which we'll talk about in a moment. So your first piece of analysis when you read this, what came to you?
Well, as you said, it's a huge military budget. It's not the largest one ever, but the only exceptions are at the height of World War II and at the height of the Iraq War. So it's higher than even during the peak years of Vietnam. So this is a really huge military budget. Now the president has said he doesn't want to go into endless wars, but a lot of the justifications for having such a military budget are that we may need to go into World War III. That's actually what the military is talking about when they talk about going to ground wars with China or Russia. So we should be realistic about what that means. And then there's the sort of, the vision of America as a completely militarized society where the government really consists of an enormous military that's all over the world, in over 150 countries in the world. The U.S. has troops, and a border wall and a corresponding immigration system. And what he wants to take away is all of the programs that help to alleviate poverty, that help people to get out of poverty, that make life better and easier, that provide for an education. Every single department in this budget gets a cut except for the Department of Defense, the Veterans Affairs Department, Homeland Security, and a little teeny tiny plus for the Department of Commerce.
And he's cutting a lot of stuff here. And I want to talk a bit about the effect this has on the American people and our analysis of that, because the Trump administration and Republicans have a very different take on what this means. Let's go back to Mr. Vought from the Bureau of Management and Budget and what he had to say about Medicare, and other things.
In terms of other major reforms, the administration is proposing uniform work requirements for Medicaid, TANF, SNAP, or food stamps in certain housing programs. We can help low-income families and end dependency on government benefits by strengthening work requirements.
So, it's not uncommon to have this doublespeak about what it means for poor people, but, what they're talking about, Lindsay can describe this better than I, they're talking about taking Medicare, Medicaid budgets, slashing them, putting the money to states to do as they will with it, they're cutting out programs for lunch for kids, and it's just slashing to the bone here.
Yeah, they have about $2.7 trillion in cuts to social programs, including some of those that you just mentioned. It's an enormous cut. It's about 9% across the board to everything that's not the military and Homeland Security. And the biggest and hardest hit are things like Medicaid, Medicare, that President Trump, when he ran for office, said he wasn't going to touch. So there's a big step back on his word in terms of those programs. And I think that may actually hurt him with his base if they come to realize that that's what's going on.
And also virtually eliminating things that have to do with developing clean energy, completely out of the budget.
Yes. So clean energy was already a tiny part of the budget. There's an Office of Renewable Energy in the Department of Energy that's budget was only about $2 billion, which is tiny by federal budget standards. And it's being cut. And across the board, cuts are happening in the Department of Energy, with the exception of nuclear weapons, which are part of that department, which are getting a boost.
I didn't read about that one. So, not surprising, though. So I'm curious, there's a couple of things here I think we should need to tackle while we're together. One is a lot of Trump's supporters, not all of them, but a number of them, plurality perhaps, are working class Americans, along with upper middle class Americans, and white Americans I'm talking about for the most part. But this budget goes directly to take away from people who are, whether you're a farmer, it takes away their subsidies, it takes away all the things people rely on in Social Security and more, talking about slashing Social Security, other benefits for Medicare. This really goes to the heart of what people expect from the government and what people expect in their lives. How do you think this will play? Do you think it will become a political factor?
Yeah, that's right. I think the extent to which it becomes a political factor depends to some extent on how far it actually goes with Congress, which is likely to be almost nowhere. So it may not become a big political issue, say, for the presidential election or anything like that. But it's true that, this budget cuts things, like you said, like the Farm Bill, things that are supposed to be kind of untouchable, like, agricultural credits. Those are things that don't usually come up for serious debate for cuts, and it just does it across the board. It leaves almost nobody untouched. And even in cases where it tries to, say that it's going to introduce some kind of new assistance program, it sort of gives something with one hand and takes it away with the other. So, for instance, they're going to make it a little bit easier for student loans to get forgiveness, for people to have their student loans forgiven. But on the other hand, they're going to make people pay a whole lot more in interest because they're taking away subsidies for student loan interest. And they're going to make people pay a higher percent of their income for student loans. So there's just really no part of this budget that actually makes life easier for anybody within the sort of bottom 90% of the population in terms of income and wealth.
Well, then this takes it over. This I think will become part of the presidential campaign, and this throws it to the Democrats. You could look at this budget as the most blatantly plutocratic budget in a long time in our country. And the Democrats seem to be really divided on how to respond from everything I've read so far, whether it's the Green New Deal or Medicare for all, and the more establishment Democrats who have been in office for a long time saying, no, that we can't have that in the budget, that goes against the grain. So, the Democrats really going to have to kind of figure out how they're going to respond to this, and it doesn't look as if they're going to have an easy time doing it.
That's right. Things are really shaking up in the Democratic Party, and we're seeing proposals like the Green New Deal and Medicare for all that are not necessarily beloved by some of the party elders or establishment figures. But, I think there's a real shift happening, and it should be very encouraging. There's such a deep hypocrisy in the administration and a lot of people in Congress saying that we can't do things like the Green New Deal because we can't afford it. while on the other hand, we've sunk almost $6 trillion into the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we're continuing to put money into those wars. So if we can afford that, I would say we could afford to do some things to make life better at home.
And politically, I mean, when this finally comes up in a major way this fall and people battle over this budget, and it doesn't come to fruition for anybody, there's no resolution to this. This will come in the middle of the major political campaigns for president and for other offices in this country. So this becomes a political football at a very critical time.
Yeah, no doubt it'll make things interesting. I mean, the Democratic candidates are still shaping up what their policy proposals look like. There's still a lot of them kind of doing footwork around trying to find their position on things like Medicare for all and the Green New Deal. And this is going to be something that sort of sets up, okay, here's what the Trump agenda looks like. It's crystal clear. It's a bigger military. It's a more, even worse immigration enforcement than he's seen so far. He wants to add ICE agents. He's taking more money for the border, and he's cutting pretty much literally everything else: education, public health, science and medical research, affordable housing. Pretty much you name it, he's cutting it. So that's a very clear vision, and that really gives Democrats something to set themselves up against. And hopefully it's not just saying no to the cuts, but it's actually saying yes to something better than that.
So does that mean you're going to be playing with some numbers, Lindsay, and coming up with something here?
Well, I've been playing a lot with numbers on cutting the Pentagon budget, and I think it's up at $750 billion if Trump gets his way. And aside from being higher than the peak of Vietnam, it's about $350 billion more than it was just before 9/11. So I think we ought to get back there. I think we've got to take those $350 billion and put them back into something else.
It's important to remind people, I think, in this that the military didn't even ask for this increase.
No, they asked for a smaller amount. And yet this is what they get. And it's not at all unprecedented. I mean, what's interesting is that some of the things that are in this budget for the military probably won't happen, but other things like this budget actually calls for fewer F-35 jet fighters for the Air Force than was planned, but Congress will probably put those back in. So things that have a way of sort of inching up for all sorts of reasons that don't really have anything to do with what the military needs.
Lindsay Koshgarian, it's always a pleasure to talk with you. Thanks for all the work you do, and look forward to talking to you again very soon.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I'm Mark Steiner here for the Real News Network. Thank you all for watching. Take care.